People who left someone at the altar. What made you do it, and what was the fallout? Story 1. Leading up to our wedding, my wife and I started experiencing more stress, as is normal. Things weren't going well with her mother, who would complain about not being included and then not show up or show up late when we tried to include her in planning activities. She had to go get it fitted, and at the same time, we had to go take care of something with a florist. So we had asked my future mother-in-law to take care of the florist while I took my wife to the dress shop. We arrived at the dress shop and everything was going well, but then my mother-in-law backed out at the last minute, so we had to take care of the florist. I guess that meant that I left my wife at the altar. Story 2. My buddy was engaged to be married and everything was going great up until about 2 months before the wedding, when the bride freaked out about something very minor during a family vacation and stopped speaking to him. They would text once a day so the other knew they were okay. They would say, "I love you," and she would assure him she still wanted to get married. 1 month before the wedding, she called it off. They still hadn't talked except for the texts, so he called all his people and told them the wedding was off. Only, he forgot about one of his friends who had been on his fiance's list because he was a mutual friend. The mutual friend still went to the wedding, where he found a wedding. The woman had been seeing someone on the side and still went through with the wedding, but to a different guy, all on my friend's dime. He had left her in charge of canceling everything. Story 3. I was a guest in the bride's side, an acquaintance from a previous job who was kind enough to invite me. Everything was going well. We started walking down the aisle, then stopped halfway. Her father and mother came over. She whispered to them, and then they all turned around and walked away. The groom immediately followed. The music kept playing, then slowly drifted away. We all just sat there in dead silence. A couple of minutes later, the father of the bride came back down the aisle and apologized. There was going to be no wedding today. We all just got up and slowly left. There were a couple of angry family members on the groom's side, but once they talked to the father of the bride, they immediately left. At the door, the mother of the bride shook my hand and thanked us for coming. She told us they would explain everything later, but for now, we should just head home. The story is that the groom confessed to the bride the night before the ceremony that he was gay. He loved her. He still wanted to marry her, provide for her, and raise children, but he needed her to know. She couldn't let him live like that, and it wasn't fair to either of them. Story 4. My wife was set to be a bridesmaid at her college friend's out-of-state wedding, which was an expensive affair. Even my wife's dress cost over $1,000. However, just 5 days before the wedding, the groom called the whole thing off. His reason? He was a member of the Church of Christ, and the bride was a Baptist. He believed that since she wouldn't join his church, she was in the wrong church, and thus they couldn't marry. To the bride's credit, her parents paid back everyone, including my wife, the money they had spent on the wedding. Story 5. My mom called off a wedding to a man she was engaged to before she met my dad. It was only 1 week before. She said they got into an argument over something very trivial, something having to do with cows, but it was enough for a wake-up call for her that they were not right for each other. I know this man, and she was right not to marry him. There were people who did not get word that the wedding was canceled and she showed up at church. I had to ask my mom what the deal with the cows was. I guess they passed by a pasture and my mom commented on how lovely the sound of cowbells is, and he basically told her she was dumb for caring. Story 6. A few weeks before the wedding, I left my fiancé. We had been together for years and the proposal was half-hearted. It seemed like he was asking because we had been together for so long and getting married was the next thing to do, not because he was excited about marrying me. I had been unhappy in the relationship for a long time, but his emotional abuse made me believe that it was the best relationship I could ever have, so I stayed. A month before the wedding, my mom visited me and saw how miserable I was. She said, "You don't have to marry him if it won't make you happy." Her words gave me permission to consider my own feelings for the first time in years, and it changed my whole perspective. I called off the wedding, moved out, took control of my life, and am now living happily ever after. I lost money on deposits and sold my wedding dress for half of what I paid for it. I left all the expensive items that I had purchased during the relationship behind to avoid prolonging any fights with them. I would pay all of it 10 times over to feel the immediate relief I felt when I left our house for the last time. I would pay it 1,000 times over to keep the life I have now without him. Story 7. Not exactly on topic, but we almost called off our wedding the day before. Her dad had a massive heart attack 2 days before the wedding and almost died. He had surgery 2 or 3 times during it, and we barely got 7 hours of sleep over 2 nights and 3 days. He was in the ICU until the ceremony, and then he showed up and walked her down the aisle with an automatic defibrillator vest, and then sat in a wheelchair. My emotions were all over the place, and I don't know how she managed to keep it together. Story 8. As someone who was left at the altar, that sucked. I dated this girl for 5 years, popped the question, and she happily agreed. 10 months later, on the day of the wedding, everything was fine until the priest asked the question. I didn't notice at first, but someone walked in as a guest to watch, and she instantly changed her tone and demeanor. When the priest asked the question, she said aloud "no" and walked away with someone. As it turned out, she had been cheating on me with that guy for a year, and he knew about our wedding and walked in to take her away. I was left with severe anger, not even a shred of sadness, just extremely pissed. I screamed at her family and mine to leave the church and let me be. Soon after, the sadness came. But I got over her surprisingly quick, in just 4 months, which was good, because I found out that the guy was using her hard-earned savings for his meth addiction. The last thing I heard about her was that she was living in a homeless shelter. Thank God I had no children with that woman. I am now happily married to someone else with kids. Story 9. I just found out that my mom called off her wedding pretty late in the process. This was in the 1960s, and the formal wedding announcement with photos had already been posted in the newspaper, because that's a thing that people used to do. I don't get it. She and her fiancé, who I'll call Steve, had met in college, got pregnant, and gave the baby up for adoption. They continued to date for another 3 years, got engaged when my mom was 21, and called off the wedding a month before the ceremony. It turns out that giving up a baby in college is a really bonding experience, and all your friends will be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you guys survived that together. You're such a great couple. You're such role models," etc. When in actuality, you're in friggin' college and are just figuring out who you are as people, and maybe that means you're not meant to be together. She says that everyone just assumed they would get married, so they were going to, because where else do they go from the adoption? Luckily, they realized they were just going along with emotions. My mom says there were no hard feelings between her and Steve. They met up every 3 to 5 years just to see what's up with each other, and she has no regrets. Unlike her actual marriage to my father, but hey, she got me out of that deal, so it wasn't all bad. Meanwhile, I just found out about or met my 54-year-old sibling for the first time, which I hadn't known about. My mom's not sick, but she's getting older, and I guess she felt she needed to get this off her chest and tell me before it was too late. It turns out my secret sister is a freaking CrossFit trainer with arms like cannons, so I have no genetic excuse for not being able to do a pull-up. Also, my mom is cool as hell, and I think this whole story makes her even cooler. Story 10. Not me, just an observer. My friend, whom we will call Clara, invited me to be her +1 because her girlfriend couldn't make it, and she didn't want people to hit on her. Since I was free, I volunteered to go. The moment we showed up, everything seemed normal, so Clara broke away to talk to the groom, whom she had known since grade school. I wandered around and found a tense older man in the back. I thought he might be nervous, so I decided to chat with him. After getting to know him a bit, he apologized to me for going so far out of my way for a wedding that'll get cancelled. Outside, I was like, "Oh no, whatever do you mean?" But on the inside, I was screaming for joy and going, "Talk about a plot twist." Turns out the old man was the groom's dad, and he had proof that the bride-to-be was only using his son as a meal ticket. She planned on leaving him after he paid off all her college debt and bought a house so she could try and take it in the divorce. He got all this from one of the bridesmaids, who secretly had a crush on the groom and didn't want to see his life get ruined by the bride. I'm talking screenshots of her admitting what she was planning to do, recordings, pictures of the bride cheating on the groom, the whole package. Of course, I asked the dad why he hadn't put a stop to the wedding sooner. Turns out, he only found out a few minutes before I showed up, and he was downing a few drinks to make it easier to deliver the news. He asked me not to tell anyone, which I obliged. So after buying him around, I went off to find Clara and quietly waited for the to hit the fan. I saw the dad skulk off toward where the groom was, and an hour or so later, the proceedings began to start. The groom stood silently at the altar, and you could tell he was tense and trying not to show how livid he really was. Not long after, the music started to float through the air, and the bride was grinning wildly as she proudly made her way down the aisle. You could tell the groom was trying his best not to explode, especially during the vows. Then when it was his turn to say "I do," he quickly capped it off with a loud "not" and just exploded on her. You could see his veins popping out of his forehead and shaking with rage. Everybody was confused. The bride's family started screaming at the groom's family. It was a show. The groom announced to everyone that he's calling off the wedding because, and I quote, "because she's an unfaithful skank who's not even fit enough to work at Hooters." The bride stormed off, fights broke out, and I was sitting in the back, giggling in the background. Watching this all unfold while Clara was dying from embarrassment because the whole time she was talking about how rock solid the relationship was. Last I heard, the bridesmaid and groom ended up getting together a few months after the wedding, and the bride ended up getting hooked on some seriously nasty stuff after the boyfriend, with whom she was cheating on the groom, dumped her since he was also just using her as a meal ticket. Clara's girlfriend was pissed that she missed the whole thing going down. Story 11. "Please take your gifts home with you when you leave" was one of the weirdest announcements I've ever made. Out of the 80+ weddings I've done, it's definitely the weirdest, and technically not even a wedding. The ceremony walking down the aisle music just kept looping and looping until the parents walked up and announced that the couple was postponing things, which was code for, damn, I really hope they work this shit out, because if they don't, that's a lot of money down the drain. They never worked it out. The bride and groom never showed their faces for the entirety of the day, and both sets of parents were crying on and off. Bridesmaids and groomsmen had changed out of their wedding attire. I was forced to make announcements like, "The buffet has now opened. Yes, they are serving the food," and "There will be no ceremonial cutting of the cake, so feel free to grab some." I was furiously texting my friends like, "What the hell do I play at a cancelled wedding?" I got replies like, "We are never getting back together," and frankly, most of Taylor Swift's catalog. Instead, I just played jazz and Daft Punk. It seemed to fit somehow. There was a complete 6-piece Katy Perry cover band that was a surprise to the bride. They just packed up and left without playing anything. No, there wasn't a dance party. Can you imagine? Anyway, I only took half of my original payment because they were friends of mine. The best part is, through a game of telephone with the maid of honor, I had to get the mother of the bride to write the check for me. She wrote my name as Russ Brook. My name's not Russ Brook, and it's nowhere near that. It starts with Ross and ends with a famous German beer that rhymes with heck. And the check cashed anyway. Crazy. Story 12. I didn't leave her at the altar. I was the one who was left. It didn't happen on the day of the wedding, but just a couple of days before, when guests from all over the country had already arrived and we had spent the last of the $40K on everything wedding related. It was the most devastating day of my life. She didn't even tell me in person. She called me while I was at work and broke the news that we were not getting married. I was a complete mess. He called my brother to ask him to notify everyone. I drove straight to my parents' house and locked myself in the guest room for a week. I never knew so much liquid could come out of someone's face for such a long period of time. It's been a journey, but I'm better off for it today. It still hurts, but at least there's some light in my life now. There is a bit of backstory, but basically, she deeply betrayed my trust about a year before the wedding, and from that day forward, my confidence fell, and it was apparent I didn't feel like an equal in the relationship, so she essentially didn't feel as doted upon or loved as she once did, which is true. Anyway, yeah, the saying is true. When you hit rock bottom, the only way out is up. Story 13. This is not my story, but my ex's. This wasn't completely at the altar, but the whole situation was bad. My ex was once engaged to a really beautiful and independent woman. In hindsight, I think he was emasculated by it. He was raised in an emotionally abusive home where he got used to his dad's bad habits as the norm. I don't know the woman's side of the story, but from the context of my ex, he pretty much played mama's boy and never really defended his fiancée from his mom, who treated her differently. He also had high demands for his girlfriend before she was worthy of marrying him. He also had to redo his proposal because he wasn't satisfied with how she reacted to the first one. On top of that, during a wedding expo where his girlfriend won some wedding packages and was asked to come on stage, like any excited bride-to-be, she jumped on stage to accept the prize. This irritated my ex, who said her actions were selfish because she didn't take him with her to the stage, and used this to justify his next actions. He cheated on her 2 months before the wedding, when all the venues and invitations were booked and sent out. This caused a huge deal of embarrassment for his poor, overly religious mom. And it gets better. Hell hath no fury like a bride scorned. And he and the new fling bumped into the now ex-fiancé at the mall a few weeks before the supposed wedding. The incident snapped his ex-fiancé and she beat up the new girl in public, who, by the way, was unaware she was girl number 2. Where was my ex in all of this? He abandoned his new girlfriend and ran away. He is proud of this fact, by the way. Ending for all, my ex dated the new girl for years and dangled the promise of marriage before he too left her and cheated on her. I was the replacement, and I was young and naive back then. I broke up with him after 2 years together. His ex-fiancée is doing much better professionally, travels the world, and seems happy. He tends to stalk her social media and hopes she misses him. My ex considers her the one who got away. The new girl, bless her heart, is a nice girl but fell in love with the wrong guy. She finally accepted the breakup and is moving on with her life. He, sadly, the bipolar part of his genetics is acting up. He's single, has no savings, went from job to job, and got scammed several times by friends and fake dating networks. Story 14. I'm as far away as I can be from the target group, but this month I was supposed to get married. I'd gotten a suit, rings, and papers. I had been dating this woman for 2 years, and even though it was a long-distance relationship, I had visited her several times. Everything was going well, and she even picked this month for the wedding because some astrology nonsense. So I went to her country for 3 months, which was the longest I had ever stayed. However, the whole time, she acted like a stranger towards me. I felt like I was a burden to her and she became increasingly careless and demanding. We didn't even get close to the altar. In fact, I spent most of my time alone in a foreign country with no friends. Despite this, I tried to make things work. But a relationship requires effort from both sides, not just from one person while the other makes increasing demands. Story 15. One of my friend's sisters, it was a few years ago, and it was an arranged Indian wedding. The woman was initially very accepting and happy with the groom. They talked and fell in love with each other, leading to the wedding. She was really looking forward to the wedding because she was very involved in the planning and preparation. However, about 1 month before the wedding, the woman met her high school crush and started to bond with him. Then she fell in love with him. Well, she eloped with the guy just hours before the wedding, and her parents disowned her. She hurt a lot of people by doing that. Story 16. I called off an engagement months before the wedding because the bride-to-be was too scared of sex to want it. I couldn't live my life like that. My whole extended family received cancellation notices, and they had never even received the invitation in the first place. Then 6 months later, she tried to get back together with me, but I turned her down. She immediately came back with an, "Oh, well, I've met someone new and we have expressed deep feelings for each other. So, goodbye." I felt sorry for the new guy. She was looking to offload him in favor of me. So how deep did these feelings actually go? I often wondered if I should have given him a heads up about what had almost happened to their relationship. Story 17. I'm a receptionist, and my ex was a packer in the warehouse at the same company. He was kind of lazy and not very respectful. On our first date about 9 years ago, he left me at a high school game when I went to the bathroom. We were engaged for 3 years, and when we finally started planning the wedding, he didn't really do anything. I broke off the wedding and started dating a salesman at the company that I'm good friends with. He is married with 2 kids. Has anyone ever been to a wedding that didn't end with a couple getting married? If so, what happened? How did the guests react? I haven't been an official guest at a dramatic wedding, but I did witness one. I was selling my services as a videographer and was booked to tape a choral performance at a local church. I always arrived early to set things up, and on this day, I discovered the church was previously reserved for a wedding, so I had to wait for the service to finish. It seemed like a typical ceremony. The organ music started and the procession began. Everything seemed normal until the bride entered. She was a tall, large woman, possibly in her 20s or 30s, and she walked down the aisle alone, which I found unusual. The ceremony began and a man in the audience stood up and shouted, "You still have time!" He was quickly shushed, but his words had an impact. The groom raised his hand, the priest stopped, and though I couldn't see the bride's face, I could hear her angrily whispering to her fiancé. "Excuse me," the groom said. "I'm sorry." He continued after a pause. He spoke to the bride and the best man, then fainted. I thought it was a medical issue, but I was wrong. The best man picked up the groom and walked down the aisle without saying a word. The bride yelled, "I hate you all!" and stormed off. No one followed her. The man who had spoken up earlier stood again and said, "I'm sorry for wasting everyone's time. You're all still welcome to come to the reception." People started to leave, whispering among themselves. I learned that the bride had pressured the groom into marriage, believing it would change his orientation. Some said the groom wasn't actually gay, but had used that as an excuse to end the relationship with his girlfriend. I felt like being in the middle of a soap opera's finale. I regretted not filming the event. Well, that would have gone viral. Story 2. This story took place in Kolkata, India, where my dad attended. The couple had been introduced to each other and, after about 6 months of dating, got engaged. They'd known each other for almost a year by this point. These are well-off people from the upper income range, not from a village. There were events the day before the wedding ceremony, which over 500 people attended, and of course, people talked, so word got out. On the evening of the wedding, a group of people showed up and blocked the street, preventing the groom from reaching the venue. All the while, the groom had been dating a woman from another family under the promise of marriage. He had even introduced himself to her parents and family, planning a future meeting between his parents and hers. Mind you, all the guests had arrived and heard this. For about an hour, there was a standoff, and the information reached the bride and her family, who called off the wedding. The guests were half in shock, half trying to eat and drink as much as they could before the inevitable cancellation. The bride's family took the matter to court, and the groom settled out of court with them. The bride and her parents personally returned all the gifts they had received. My dad didn't allow them to return his gift and told her to keep it, considering the circumstances. In another story, my best friend was getting married to someone I didn't think he should. I advised against it, and his family did too. After I moved away, I think he just wanted something. Anyway, she showed up intoxicated at her own wedding. Her family tried to sober her up without the groom noticing by having her rest and taking pills. Keep in mind, my buddy is a very straight-laced guy who rarely drinks. Throughout the lead up to the ceremony, I had to stop her 3 different mothers from sneaking her whole bottles of drinks. She managed to keep it together enough that maybe some people in the back couldn't tell she was absolutely hammered, but I'm pretty sure most people knew. In all their wedding photos, her eyes are half closed or almost cross-eyed. Fast forward, she became a major drinker. Tried breastfeeding their child while intoxicated and hid things in the house. She spent so much on drinks that he took away her credit card, leading her to steal booze from stores. He sent her to a hospital where she met a user who got her back into her old habits. She also started a relationship with him. They left and went on a crime spree involving theft, reckless behavior like sudden braking at high speeds, living in a car, trading her car for some powder. He now has custody of their child and her child from the previous relationship. He's a really good guy and very smart. This just shows how blinded you can be in certain situations. This wedding shouldn't have happened, and I like to think it didn't in an alternate timeline. Story 3. I have a perfect example. I used to work with a girl named Ashley. She worked in my office a couple of desks down. She was engaged to someone I never met. He traveled a lot for work, or so I was told. We became close friends, and a few of us were invited to the wedding. Ashley's coworkers threw her a party the weekend before the wedding. I went and had a great time. I had no idea what would happen next. A couple of days before the wedding, while at work, I heard coworkers talking loudly about something terrible. I went over to find out what was going on and learned Ashley had called off the wedding. Family and friends from Utah had already flown in for it. It turned out the fiancé wasn't a good person. He had no job and was stealing from her. She decided not to go through with the wedding. 3 months after the canceled wedding, Ashley and I started dating. She told me later she had doubts about the marriage and feelings for me, which I didn't realize I shared until after the ordeal. We've been married for 5 years now and have a son together. When people ask how we met, we leave that story out. On another occasion, during the "do you take this man" part of my brother's wedding, his sister-in-law just stood there, silent, for about 3 minutes. She had a deer-in-the-headlights look. The minister asked her mom to join her and told everyone to be patient, saying it was just wedding jitters. My brother looked stunned. He sat down, put his head between his knees, and tried not to pass out. After nearly half an hour and several checks by the minister, my sister-in-law and her mom returned. The ceremony restarted from the beginning, with the bride walking down the aisle again. She cried through most of the ceremony, but they got through it. We later learned that a close family friend's husband had passed away that morning after a long battle with an illness, leaving a widow in her early 40s. It hit my sister-in-law hard because the neighbor had been like a second mother to her. The grief and the realization that marriage means someone will eventually lose their loved one overwhelmed her. They're still married, with 3 kids, a dog, and a house in the suburbs, but there was a touch-and-go moment for about half an hour. In a separate story, I was the best man at my friend's wedding to a woman who was a bit unstable. The wedding was in an old house in the staircase landing. The groom and I heard her upstairs, telling her dad she didn't want to go through with it. He basically told her there were 100 people waiting, so she had to do it. And she did. I don't know why my friend didn't back out or get an annulment the next day. He somehow blocked that memory out. 7 years later, he spent over $100,000 in a custody battle, but now has sole custody of their child after her repeated displays of instability in front of a judge. Despite false allegations and the system's tendency to favor the mother, his persistence and willingness to sacrifice everything for his child paid off. The funny part was, when they divorced, he asked why I hadn't warned him. I reminded him of all the times I tried, and he finally remembered. Story 4. I worked at a catering company for a while. At a Hawaiian-themed wedding on the beach, the bride and the groom were holding hands at sunset. The officiant asked if anyone objected to their union, and a guy stood up from the back and said he did. People laughed, thinking it was a joke, but the guy was already walking down the aisle towards the families. The officiant thought it was a prank and was about to dismiss it. The guy whispered something to the groom's father and then the bride's father. Both families decided there would be a short delay. The bride, groom, immediate family, and the guy went inside the venue. 10 minutes later, a few cars left. I was busy at the bar on the deck, knowing people would want drinks regardless of the outcome. The bride's father came out and announced the wedding was off. But since the food and drinks were ready, everyone was welcome to stay and enjoy them. I never found out what the guy said or if the couple ever got married. However, there were enough leftovers of steak and lobster to feed my roommates and me like royalty for most of the week. Damn, bro. Way to give me blue ball on that one. Story 5. A guy I know, who's my brother's friend, married a girl from our hometown. She graduated a year after me, and he graduated 3 years before me. I knew her from riding the bus to school together in elementary school. The wedding went well, and everyone was happy. The reception was fine too, until the after party at a bar. The bride and groom were drinking, and when the groom wanted to leave, the bride refused and got too close to an older bartender. The groom, hammered and upset, left alone. It turned out she went home with the bartender and had been seeing him for months. She was 21 and he was 38. They obviously divorced. The next day, the groom went to the bar with a baseball bat. He called out the bartender and the police arrived. They sympathized with him but couldn't let him fight. They drove him home without charging him. The bride's mother sided with her daughter and her father sided with the groom. A month later, the bride's parents, married for 25 years, filed for divorce because of the incident. It shocked the whole town. She was a pretty girl who was unfaithful to a nice guy with an older bartender on her own wedding night. She left town and I haven't seen her since. In another story, I had a friend I don't talk to much anymore, but we're not on bad terms. We just drifted apart. I was deployed to Afghanistan and couldn't make his wedding, which I regret because it was crazy. He and his girlfriend dated for 5 years and were getting married. Everyone liked her. Educated, smart, and attractive. On his wedding day, he left his phone in a room where the wedding was taking place. He needed it to call his late cousin, who was at the wedding. He found the bride-to-be with a friend of a bridesmaid in that room. They probably thought it wouldn't be used. He's not confrontational, he just gets upset and leaves. He left, furious, and on his way out called her a derogatory name loudly, silencing the room where guests were waiting. Mutual friends told me this story, and I believe it. My friend, the groom, packed her things in the garage and didn't let her back in the house. They lived together, but everything was in his name. She was decent enough to leave without causing legal trouble. She tried to explain and apologize, but he couldn't forgive or forget. He was devastated. Story 6. I attended a wedding where the groom backed out the night before the ceremony. The couple was religious and had been college sweethearts, planning to marry the summer after graduation before he went to grad school. The bride had been my roommate, and I remember the groom reading her Bible stories to tuck her in, with the door always open. The wedding was in her hometown, a few hours from college, so guests had already arrived and booked hotels. With the wedding and reception canceled, we spent the time at the local bar, discussing their relationship in detail since there was nothing else to do. The groom's family left early and the bride's family wasn't up for any celebration. As someone who liked the groom more, it was tough. But it was better he realized it would be a mistake rather than going alone with everyone's expectations. On another occasion, I went to a wedding in the early 90s in Torrance, California. It was my then-girlfriend's cousin's wedding, held at a small church with a reception at Alpine Village. We were in the pews with about 100 people when we heard yelling. After a few minutes, someone told us the wedding was canceled. We received no explanation, and I never found out what happened. However, we realized there was an open bar at the reception, already paid for, so we went there, along with some other guests, and enjoyed many drinks. After about an hour, the bride and groom showed up, indicating they had gotten married after all. The reception turnout was low since it was before the days of mobile phones, and many who left the church missed out on the open bar. That meant more drinks for those of us who stayed. Story 7. About a decade ago, I was present at a friend's wedding ceremony. We were gathered at the chapel, and it's customary for the bride to keep the groom waiting at the altar for a short while. As minutes ticked by, guests began to jest, with comments like, "Maybe she's having second thoughts," or "Could she be practicing her wedding kiss with a driver?" It was all in jest, and no one genuinely believed that cold feet were at play. However, as more time passed, the atmosphere shifted from playful to anxious. Attempts to contact the bride and her driver via cell phones were met with no response, until a man claiming to be a police officer answered the bride's phone. The driver had crashed the car, veering off the road and rolling down a slope. Both the bride and the driver were severely injured, but alive. They were being airlifted to a hospital. As I was informed, the marriage was later officiated at the hospital with only immediate family present, and a religious ceremony was held a few months afterward. Moving on to a different tale, my girlfriend and I met in Geneva, Switzerland, where we lived for a period. After a relatively brief courtship, we realized we were deeply in love and decided to marry. We drove downtown to the Ita Civil to submit our application. For 6 months, we found ourselves there weekly, initially to obtain a list of required documents and then to repeatedly plead our case. They insisted on one specific document, proof that our respective countries would recognize the marriage. When I reached out to my embassy, I was met with confusion and skepticism. No one seemed to know what I was talking about, and others had married there without such a document. I even consulted our Minister of Justice, but everyone insisted that the documents didn't exist, and, of course, they had to recognize the marriage. Despite our explanations, the Ita Civil remained adamant about the document. We were at a loss, and during one of our visits, when my girlfriend was moved to tears, the head manager remarked, "In America, people can decide to get married in a whim, like choosing between a movie and a wedding. But here in Switzerland, it's not like that. Those people on the bench, they've been waiting to marry for 5 years." Her words deeply upset us, and we firmly stated that it wasn't her place to dictate our marriage, as we had already made our decision. Story 8. A friend invited me to her cousin's wedding as her date. The ceremony seemed to go well, except the groom was fidgeting, looking around and wearing a hostile expression. I thought it was nerves. They said her vows, typical Protestant Christian words, with the addition of stomping on glass at the end. When the priest got to, "I pronounce you," the groom didn't wait for the kiss the bride part. He grabbed the bride, turned them both to face the audience, and started yelling at her side of the aisle, claiming she was his now and they should never expect to see her again. The bride tried to protest or calm him down, but when she spoke, he backhanded her, knocking her off the stage. This happened in seconds, and everyone was stunned. As we began to react, the priest hit the groom in the face. The groom fell, and the audience was in chaos, yelling and pushing. The priest calmly tore up what I assume was their marriage certificate. He tried to calm things down, but it was chaotic and looked like it might turn into a fight. My friend and others helped the bride leave, and I tried to keep people away, not knowing who was on whose side, and covered their exit. Once outside, we got the bride into a car with her mom and my friend so they could leave, and I quickly went to my car. A few days later, I learned the groom was arrested for breaking into the bride's house with a weapon, trying to find her and trashing her house. The marriage wasn't recorded, so the bride didn't have to get a divorce. I declined wedding invitations for some time after that. Story 9. As a videographer for weddings, I've witnessed many memorable moments. One such occasion was when I was hired for a standard Christian American wedding in a large church. I arrived 20 minutes early to set up and capture some establishing shots, anticipating any traffic delays. Another wedding was already in progress, so I discreetly set up my camera and tripod at the back of the church. Suddenly, a gasp broke the air as the bride dashed for a side door, her maid of honor in tow. The entire church fell into a stunned silence. The echo of her footsteps, the only sound as she departed. For a moment, everyone was frozen. The groom, the families, the priest, even the other wedding's photographer and videographer. Then the bride's father shouted in disbelief and chased after her, his wife close behind. I never learned the outcome of that situation, but for the next 10 minutes, an awkward tension filled the air as people waited to see if the ceremony would proceed. Eventually, the priest announced that everyone had to leave to accommodate the next wedding. The wedding party exited awkwardly as my wedding party waited outside. I lost sight of the groom amidst my own preparation, so I am unsure if he pursued the bride. It was a dramatic and unprecedented event, as most ceremony cancellations or disruptions are usually more discreet, occurring weeks or months in advance. In a different scenario, I was present at a wedding where the pastor refused to marry the couple because the groom hadn't memorized his vows. This pastor was renowned for his ceremonies, and as he didn't charge for his services, he required couples to complete a course and memorize part of their vows. The couple had fulfilled all their requirements, but the groom hadn't taken the memorization seriously. When it was his turn, he attempted to use a cheat sheet, which upset the pastor. After apologizing, the pastor left the ceremony. Many family members who had traveled from afar were understandably upset. However, no one blamed the pastor as he had been clear about not marrying couples he didn't believe were prepared. The bride was visibly upset but held back tears, while the groom, in the back, was drunk and crying over his failure. In the end, the church contacted the pastor to perform the ceremony. The second service went smoothly, with the pastor making lighthearted remarks about the reconvening. Afterward, it seemed as if the first service had been forgotten, and the groom's forgotten vows were no longer a concern. The couple did get married, but they had to make it official in front of a judge a week later. Story 10. My wife and I are both clergy, as are our friends. We support each other at weddings, helping with setup or just being there for moral support, and the free food. The worst thing I've seen was a bride's grandmother passing away during the ceremony while in a wheelchair. The bride had her grandmother read something emotional about how much she loves her granddaughter. After finishing, she closed her eyes, seemingly moved to tears. She never opened them again. At first, the bride's mother thought the grandmother had fallen asleep. They wheeled her down the aisle during the recessional, not wanting to wake her. When they couldn't wake her for the post-wedding photos, chaos ensued. I learned about her passing before the guests did. A friend conducted the ceremony, pulled my wife and me aside, saying the reception might be canceled. Guests panicked when the ambulance arrived, and the bride couldn't take photos due to her tears ruining her makeup. On a positive note, the reception had an amazing taco bar. Moving on to a lighter tale, I was invited to a college friend's wedding. We were best friends in college but lost touch. I invited her to my wedding, so I think she felt obligated to invite me to hers. The wedding was on a Friday, about 2 hours from where I live. My husband and I took time off work and drove there. We hit traffic and got dressed at a rest stop. When we arrived, we saw a large group of well-dressed people leaving. My husband joked, "Are you sure the wedding is today?" I assured him it was. We looked for signs or directions, but ended up at the check-in desk, asking for the wedding's location. The woman gave us a confused look, asked for the names again, and called the manager over. The manager informed us the wedding had been canceled a month earlier. A shocked expression prompted the manager to apologize and try to explain. We thanked her, changed out of our wedding attire, and went miniature golfing instead. Haven't spoken to the girl since. Impromptu date night sounds romantic. Anyway, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 11. I'm a wedding photographer commissioned to cover a wedding in Thailand over 5 days. It included top-notch accommodations and all expenses paid, plus my normal rate. I had previously shot the couple's engagement in Southern California and rescheduled the wedding for the following year after it was postponed, as they paid half up front. Fast forward about 12 months, I prepared for an epic destination wedding. The couple was of mixed heritage, Middle Eastern and American and Japanese and American. I decided to have 2 separate ceremonies to honor their families traveling from abroad. There were about 30 attendees from around the world, not including myself, my assistant, and 2 videographers. We stayed in a private compound with villas on a small island, a 2-hour flight from Bangkok. The location was stunning. The guests were great and the accommodations were spectacular. Day 1. My assistant and I flew to Bangkok and met the couple for the first time since their engagement shoot. Everything was great. They even hosted us in their hotel so we could hang out for about 24 hours before their parents and siblings arrived. Day 2. We headed to the island, met the remaining guests, and checked into our grand villa. We were provided with motorbikes, fresh mangoes, and an open bar. It was like heaven. We had about 4 hours before a welcoming dinner where we were asked to provide light coverage, but more as guests ourselves. It's always nice to be treated this way by clients. After resting, unpacking, and mingling, the groom approached us for a formal creative meeting at 6:30 p.m. sharp by the pool. As 6:30 rolled around, we sat down to discuss the plan for the week. We received a schedule and some interesting creative requests. They wanted us to capture the real life, appreciating our art and vision, which sounded ideal for any commissioned artist. However, the way they spoke was strange. They became super metaphysical, deep, and quite frankly, a bit bizarre. At one point, the groom put his hand on my leg, closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and smiled, saying he loved our energy. It felt odd. They transformed into spiritual nutjobs, and it only got more intense. After the strange meeting, we left it off, had a beer by the pool, and went up for dinner. We were last to sit down, but it wasn't a big deal as the bride and groom were still in their suite. Everyone began chatting, eating appetizers, and having drinks. After 2 hours, the bride's parents whispered to each other with blank faces, walked over to the bride and groom's quarters, and everyone felt uncomfortable. We realized we had started the party without them. The maid of honor and best man assured everyone everything was fine, suggesting the couple might come out later for drinks. The bride's parents returned in good spirits, and we carried on. Around 11 o'clock, feeling jet-lagged, we waited for the bride and groom. When they finally came, everything was fine. Spirits were high, and the bride thanked each guest, even including us in her heartfelt speech about how they met. The groom began to speak, seeming aloof, almost like someone with early stages of Alzheimer's. He thanked each of us with tears of joy, spending about 10 minutes in the first 10 people. It was getting really late, and the ceremony was the next day. The bride's father suggested he wrap it up so we could all get to bed, which upset the groom. He got angry, told the father he didn't appreciate that, dropped the mic, and stormed off. Everyone felt what we felt at the earlier meeting, but brushed it off and settled into our rooms. Day 3. The schedule was relaxed, with the ceremony planned before sunset. The bride was getting ready with the bridesmaids, and the groom was with his best man. We were told to meet for breakfast at 10 a.m. to go over house rules. The manager was cool, just asking us to be nice, not break anything, and not flush anything but waste down the toilet due to old plumbing. It was short and sweet, but the groom interjected, upset the manager was being too serious, and stormed off. Despite the weird drama, we got great shots and had a good time when the groom wasn't around, but things got weird when he showed up. Everyone was afraid to talk. We would just listen to his ramblings, mostly metaphysical nonsense. He would rest his hand on someone and close his eyes for a minute or so, making things progressively more awkward. During the beach ceremony, everything went as planned until they exchanged rings. The groom removed his, walked to the ocean, and placed it in the water. After 10 minutes of confusion, the bride started crying. This wasn't part of the plan. We looked for the ring in the water, and the groom stood with his arms to the sky, but nothing happened. He walked back, and nobody knew what to do. The bride went to her room hysterically and was shot family portraits as scheduled. The most awkward photos ever. The reception proceeded without the bride and groom. They apologized later, saying they weren't used to the attention, and the groom had a nervous breakdown. Day 4. The second ceremony was scheduled, but we noticed furniture and decor scattered on the lawn. The groom had thrown everything out of their room, including lights, sheets, and furniture. He went berserk, according to the staff, but nobody else saw anything. We never saw him again. The bride's father had him removed from the property, and the second wedding was canceled. We spent the rest of the trip hanging out with the guests, like a free vacation. After a few more days, I pieced things together. The groom was never a spiritual healer, he was a dentist. The only person who knew him besides the bride was his best man, who left before we could question him. Not a single guest, even the parents, had met him in person before us. The photographers. His wife didn't even know he was a dentist. To this day, I can't fully understand what happened. The best theory we have is that he either started or stopped taking medicine in Thailand, but he had to be crazy in general. It was bizarre. Story 12. My friend managed to get married with his best friend, but then she got into a car with some random guy. I was confused and asked my other friend what was happening. He explained that the guy was driving her to their honeymoon spot because she didn't like the way her new husband drove. 2 days later, I found out that once my friend reached the cabin for their honeymoon, he walked in on them in the shower together. She then revealed that she only married him to get her parents off her back, that she hated him, and was with this guy the whole week instead. They planned to tell everyone it wasn't working out once they got back and got an annulment. My friend was devastated and never recovered. In another story, about 20 years ago, I, being Indian, was supposed to marry a close family friend. He was nice, but on the wedding day, he ran off with my younger sister. Yes, you read that right. He ran away with my sister. My entire family was upset and claimed his younger brother as compensation. I ended up marrying his younger brother. The marriage has been superb, like a dream marriage you see on TV, but yes, the marriage was an accident. On another occasion, I had a friend who called off the wedding that morning but still held the reception that evening. The bride's family didn't approve, so they didn't go through with it. Only those invited to the small ceremony knew, and many at the reception didn't. Guests were congratulating them, and the bride and groom just pretended they were married. They ended up getting married 4 months later in secret. The reception was awkward for those who knew. The couple is still together, as far as I know. They kind of went into hiding after the non-wedding. This didn't happen in the US, oddly enough. The bride was 19, so maybe she was afraid to stand up to her parents, or maybe she just wanted a happy wedding day. Story 13. My older brother married his girlfriend of 10 years. After the party, when most of us had left, it all fell apart. She and my brother's best friend had planned for 3 years to marry and then divorce so she could take the house and live there with a guy she was seeing behind my brother's back. She didn't know the house was in my dad's name, not my brother's. She was entitled to nothing. Last I heard, her family and boyfriend abandoned her after she gained weight. In another story, we went to the States for a wedding. Everything went well, and the day after, we went to the government office for paperwork. The woman didn't know how to process her Canadian IDs, so we dealt with the department head. We filled out forms, signed, gave her address, and flew home a couple of days later. We waited for her paperwork, but it never arrived. I called, got the runaround for 20 minutes, and was told they had no record of us. When I asked what to do from another country, they had no ideas. We'll have to marry again, but I didn't want to marry in this city. It's weird. Never saw myself getting married, and now that I am, I'm not officially. On another occasion, I'm a wedding minister in Japan. I've overseen over 500 weddings, and there have been a few I thought wouldn't happen after rehearsals. It's usually an arrogant or absent-minded groom who seems oblivious, or a father disapproving of his daughter's choice. Just a month ago during a rehearsal, I had to ask the parents for approval. It's like giving away the bride, but both sides do it. I asked him and he needed a nudge from his wife before saying yes, looking at the floor. The groom, whom I thought was a complete idiot, didn't even notice. It was uncomfortable. During the actual ceremony, the father answered quicker but still looked at the floor and then began to cry. Story 14. My boyfriend was friends with a guy who was supposed to get married in another country. About 50 people had booked flights and accommodations. The night before the flight, they called off the wedding but insisted everyone go anyway, as most had used their vacation time. The bride and groom got hammered on the flight, which was weird for everyone, and spent their wedding night having dinner instead. They'd been on and off ever since, but never married. Everyone still had a good vacation. In another story, I worked at a wedding where the couple broke up during the reception. It was on a building's roof with a small pool. The groom got intoxicated and pushed the bride, in her wedding gown, into the water. It was early in the reception. She stormed out and was taken home by a friend. Another story, not mine, but here it is. I was talking to a DJ who told me about a wedding he worked at. During the reception, it was time to have the cake. The groom put it into the bride's face and she was furious. She turned red, screamed at him, and hit him so hard it sounded like thunder, echoing through the hall. Everyone gasped and went quiet. She stormed off. Later, the bride's father gave the DJ $500. He said, "This marriage is over. She's left the building, but I've paid for this party and all my family and friends are here. I want you to finish the night strong. Keep the music playing and don't mention them again." The DJ agreed and everyone had a great time. Wedding turned into rave. Love it. Story 15. I was waiting for my bride-to-be, who texted me that she wasn't feeling well and needed to go to the hospital. I grew suspicious when no one from her family showed up. It turned out they never sent their invitations and never told me the wedding was off. So there I was with my friends and family at a non-existent wedding. Moving on to another story. I know a guy who was supposed to marry his longtime girlfriend in Vegas. He flew there, friends flew there, but when he tried to fly, he was turned back at the border due to a bust operation. He had to call his girlfriend, telling her he couldn't make it and to enjoy the party. They got married once they returned to Canada. In a different story, my then girlfriend took me to a wedding where I knew no one. I was left with the groom and his party while she was a bridesmaid. The groom and his friends got hammered and bailed without telling anyone. I was the only one who knew the wedding wasn't happening. I had to go to the bride's room, explain the situation to my girlfriend, and we had to break the news. We broke up later and I lost contact with the bride and groom, so I don't know what happened after. Finally, I recall arriving late at a friend's wedding. Carefully opening the door to avoid interrupting the ceremony, I walked in on an argument between the groom and his brother. The priest was trying to calm them down and the brother hit the priest, knocking him out. A brawl was because of the brother's shirt color. It was light blue, not white like everyone else's, and it upset the groom. Story 16. I knew a guy who bakes wedding cakes on the side. Once he got a call from a woman he vaguely knows, asking if he could make a cake for a wedding that weekend. He agreed. The bride ordered a cake with the bride and groom on top and another figure, a pregnant woman, off to the side. She was very specific about the pregnant woman's hair color and details. The wedding and reception went ahead. When they brought out the cake, everyone gathered around. People noticed the 3 figurines in the cake. The bride called attention to it, saying, "That's me, that's the groom, and this is the woman he got pregnant 6 months ago." Then she walked out. It's one of the craziest things I've ever heard. The lengths people go to for drama. Last I heard, the couple was still married. In another story, my sister-in-law and her husband are the sharpest tools in the shed. They planned their wedding for 2 years. On the day of the wedding, there was major highway construction causing detours between their house and the venue. We all arrived at the venue and met the priest, who asked for the marriage certificate. After a few minutes, they realized they'd forgotten it. The priest said they couldn't get married without it, so an uncle offered to drive back to their house, find the certificate, and bring it back. It took him about an hour and a half to return, only for the priest to say, "This isn't a marriage certificate, it's an application for one." My sister-in-law and her husband didn't realize they had to fill it out, apply, and pay for it. They thought they'd just give the application to the priest. The priest couldn't marry them, so the wedding turned into an exchange of vows promising to get married later. It was ridiculous. The next day, they actually got married at my in-laws' house. Story 17. I was driving on a semi-rural road past a large church on a chilly, windy, rainy day. The sky was gray and cloudy, so I was surprised to see a beautiful bride walking towards a vacant, muddy field near the church. The groom was trailing behind her by about 12 strides. At first, I thought they were taking photos, which seemed odd given the weather. Curious, I watched as the bride threw her veil to the ground and her dress dragged in the dirt. There were at least 200 cars parked in the lot, and suddenly, 4 of them raced to the road, about half a mile from the church. I watched for a bit before feeling awkward and leaving. I was curious about what had happened. When I got home, I searched online for any news but found nothing. Later, a customer at work who attended the church told me the story. It turned out the groom had been mistreating the bride's sister, and this came out just before the ceremony was to start. The bride ran from the church, and her family didn't know at the time. The image of her walking through that field on that gray day, in her gown, has always stayed with me. I often think about it and hope she's doing okay. Story 18. I worked on a yacht that specializes in weddings, probably working about 300 weddings in my lifetime. These events are booked months in advance, with non-refundable yacht reservations. The bride and groom split up about a month before the wedding. The groom, aware that people had traveled and he'd spent thousands on the yacht, food and alcohol, decided to throw a party instead. It was a groom with his groomsmen and many family male members having a frat-like party for hours. It was nice walking into work expecting to cater to a wedding and essentially becoming a nightclub bartender instead. On another story, a family I used to work for had a huge wedding for their daughter. They had to donate a lot of money to the city's largest church to hold the ceremony there. During the ceremony, one of the groomsmen passed out and hit the marble floor hard. Everyone stopped what they were doing to help the groomsman, leaving the bride and 2 friends at the altar. Luckily, she came from a showbiz family. After the initial shock, she said, "So, anyone here from out of town?" This got a laugh, and she entertained the crowd for a few minutes while they checked on the groomsman. Everyone returned, and the priest was flustered. The bride said, "Let's start from the dearly beloved line." And they continued the ceremony. In a separate wedding, where my parents attended about 30 years ago, where all the guests were seated, waiting for the groom to walk down the aisle. After a long wait, they decided to let the bride go first, as the groom never appeared. No one was too concerned at this point, as he was known for his jokes. Another 20 minutes passed, and his parents, best men, and everyone but the guests were searching for him. Eventually, everyone was allowed into the reception hall to sit, chat, and watch TV. Some breaking news came on, reporting that a man in a black suit was on top of a building, considering jumping. And shortly after, he did. A couple of days later, it was confirmed that he was the groom, as everyone had suspected. I'm not sure what the bride's reaction was, but my mom says everyone was shocked and unsure of how to feel about the situation. Story 19. Friends of my girlfriend were getting married in Croatia, so we decided to attend. Most of the 300 guests were from the US. However, during our flight from the East Coast, there was a big fight. The wedding was called off. We still had a great time in Split, Croatia, but we wish the wedding had happened after spending the money to get there. In another story, my fiancé and I attended his coworker's wedding in June. We waited outside the church for the rest of the office group, but an hour later, we were told the bride had called off the wedding because she felt the bridesmaids were taking over. The wedding wasn't turning out as she wanted. The groom's mother invited us to the reception anyway, as everything was paid for, but it felt too awkward. So we went to Olive Garden instead. This experience led to a deep discussion, and we decided our wedding would be small and non-traditional. It's easy for such an important day to become about pleasing everyone else. At another wedding where my brother attended, the bride threw a lamp at the groom the night before, hitting him in the eye. This wasn't the first time something like this happened. They didn't get married the next day, but did so secretly later, despite my brother and his friends advising the groom to end the engagement. One story that involved me was when I almost walked out on marrying my now wife. I wasn't that into her and thought about the commitment and people's opinions, wondering how bad it would really be. It's not terrible. We have 3 kids, but I should have called it off and married someone else. I don't make enough for a divorce. I never found her very attractive or interesting, and I was just too lonely and single for too long, so I settled. Now she has health issues, has gained 80 pounds, and can't work. I'm not absolutely miserable, but I'm not really happy either. I realized I was angry at her for marrying me for years, but I had to let it go. Runaway brides. What's your story? What was the final straw? How last second did you leave? On my birthday, my boyfriend proposed to me at my party, in front of all my family and friends. I said yes, mostly because I felt too embarrassed to say no. We'd been together for 2 years, but I was just about to start university and I wasn't ready for marriage at all. Later, when we were alone, I asked if we could have a long engagement, at least a year or two, and he agreed. We told our families and friends that we would wait to get married. Less than 3 months later, his mom and my mom took me out for lunch and then decided to look at wedding dresses, saying it's never too early to start planning. When I saw a really nice dress that was on sale, my fiancé's mom insisted on buying it for me. Their family was quite wealthy, and I'd saved money for all my fiancé's important life events, like education, his first car, and the wedding. She said they were happy to cover the big costs because they wanted a big wedding, and joked that I could pay her back with grandchildren. A few weeks later, his mom introduced me to a friend who was a florist. Before I knew it, I was looking at bouquets and talking about table arrangements. Then my fiancé started discussing wedding venues, saying we needed to plan to find the perfect place. I started to panic. I was only a few months into university, still figuring out my education. Now I was choosing venues for a wedding that was supposed to be years away. A wedding that was looking more and more like a grand affair. I tried to talk to my fiancé, but he wouldn't listen. We found a venue we liked, but they had no availability for almost 2 years. So we booked it. I could finally relax, thinking I had 2 years to prepare for my big, crazy wedding. Then the venue had a cancellation less than 6 months away, and my fiancé accepted it without telling me. He just canceled our future date and took the new one that was available. He arranged the entire wedding with the help of his mom and mine, with her overbearing ways, before telling me. When he told me everything was booked, I was furious. He said he had gone with all my choices for catering, venue, flowers, and that I should be grateful that he'd handled all the stressful stuff. All I had to do was show up. When I explained that I didn't want to get married in 6 months and that I had told him several times I wasn't ready for marriage yet, he called me childish and said the invitations were already being printed, so it was too late to change my mind. I finally realized he was manipulating me, so I returned the engagement ring and told him I didn't want to see him anymore. I told my family and friends, cried a lot, and changed my phone number because he wouldn't stop calling. 2 months later, my mom got a call from his mom, who couldn't reach me to arrange dress fittings and finalize the bridesmaids. He hadn't told them we had broken up. My mom explained everything to his mom, thinking that was the end of it. The following week, she had the nerve to send my family a bill for half of what they had spent on the wedding. It was thousands of pounds. They had booked everything, down to the cake and the wedding favors, without telling me, and now they want me to pay? Sounds like he really wanted a trophy wife and not a marriage. Story 2. When I was still in high school, I met a guy who claimed to be in the army. This was before the internet was widely used, so there was no easy way to check if what he said was true. We got along well, and I was young and fell in love quickly, so when he proposed, I was very happy. Looking back, there were warning signs. He asked my parents for permission to marry me. He proposed loudly in a pizza shop, which made it socially awkward to say no. He didn't have his own place to live. I never met his family. I never saw any proof that he was actually in the military. A few weeks later, we had an argument because he called out his sister's name during intimate time. He then told me that everything would be okay because he was going to take me to Kentucky to live on an army base. He also said he wanted me to be barefoot and pregnant most of the time, laughing as he said it. We were planning to get married and leave the day after I graduated from high school. I did a lot of thinking about my feelings in the situation. I became quiet and withdrawn. One day while visiting my grandmother, she asked me, "Are you in love with him or are you in love with the idea of a wedding?" Her question made me realize the truth. I cried and ended my relationship with him just 2 weeks before I was supposed to graduate. It turned out he'd already made arrangements with the justice of the peace for a wedding, but he got married anyway, just 3 weeks later using the same ring he had given to me. I feel sorry for the girl he married. I wish I could talk to her to warn her about him. Story 3. I had a friend who didn't know she was the bride until she was halfway down the aisle at a wedding. Her parents had arranged a marriage for her, which is common in her culture. They told her that the whole family had been invited to a cousin's wedding. My friend was told that everyone would be wearing white, although I didn't remember the reason for that. They arrived at the church just before the bride was supposed to walk down the aisle. My friend, thinking they were late, wanted to quietly slip in and stay at the back of the church. However, her father took her arm and they started walking up the aisle. It wasn't until they were halfway up the aisle that she stopped and realized everyone was looking at her, smiling and crying tears of joy. She turned to one of her aunts sitting in the pew next to her and asked who was getting married. The whole church went silent, and then the aunt looked at my friend's father and said, "You can't be serious. You planned a wedding for your daughter and just expected her to go along with it? Have the two of them even met? Did you really think this would work?" The room was filled with chatter about them, and the father just cleared his throat and told his daughter to keep walking. Luckily, the aunt grabbed my friend and pulled her into the pew, putting her past the row of people, and they both ran out of the church. After that, her parents disowned her and she moved in with that aunt. It's important to note that they are an Indian family living in the U.S. Her parents are very traditional, and she has expressed that she didn't want to get married and instead wanted to focus on her career. Story 4. I dated a woman for a short time who was a runaway bride. Her ex-fiancé never hurt her, but he constantly put her down and was emotionally hurtful. He would tell her she was lucky to have him, that she could never find anyone better, that she was unattractive, but he tolerated it, and so on. Despite being intelligent, she had a medic in the military, saving many lives in Pakistan. She fell to his emotional manipulation, which can happen to anyone given enough time. On her wedding day, her father, who hadn't been a big part of her life since divorcing when she was a teenager, was talking to her in the room when she was getting ready. He became concerned when she started repeating some of the negative things her fiancé had said to her. In the middle of her sentence, he stood up and unexpectedly suggested they go to Dairy Queen. When she was younger, they often went to DQ to talk over ice cream. After a moment, she agreed, and they left for Dairy Queen. However, he drove to a town 3 towns over, and they sat and talked for hours over ice cream while her phone rang until the battery drained in the car. She said it felt like a huge burden had been lifted from her shoulders, and although she felt bad that her friends and family were waiting for her at the wedding, she knew they would all understand later. Eventually, her father returned to the church and told the bridal party that the wedding was off. He then got his friends to help him move all her things out the next day. She said that while her dad wasn't the best father during her teenage years, he was the best dad anyone could ask for on that day. We dated for a couple of weeks before we realized we weren't a good match. We parted on good terms, but I haven't spoken to her since. Story 5. My dad was a runaway groom. He broke off his engagement just 3 days before the wedding. It was the mid-1970s and he was in his early 20s. His fiancée, who wasn't my mom, and her mother pressured him into proposing. He did it with my grandmother's ring. He also felt like society expected him to get married. It was more common to marry at a young age back then. Deep down, he knew she wasn't the right person for him, but he thought maybe all men felt that way before getting married, so he ignored his doubts and hoped his feelings would change. Months went by and all the wedding plans were made. When relatives and friends from out of town started flying in for the wedding and gifts started arriving, the reality of the situation got him hard. He realized he had made a big mistake, as God Bluff would say. He sat down with my grandma and grandpa and told them, "I don't want to go through with this." They were proud of him for being honest and were actually a bit thrilled because they didn't like his fiancée at all. But they told him he needed to tell her face to face right away. And so my dad did. He won't tell me the details, but he said it was the most difficult conversation, argument, and experience he's ever had. But he ended the engagement. This was the 1970s, so you couldn't just send a text or post on Facebook to tell everyone the wedding was canceled, like a friend of mine did. My dad took the responsibility to call every single invited guest to let them know the wedding was off. Even more, he personally returned the gifts that people had sent. His fiancée sold my grandmother's ring. Story 6. This isn't my story, and I'm not sure if it counts as a runaway situation, but my sister broke up with her fiancé 4 months before their wedding, which was already planned and paid for. To be honest, I don't know the full story. Even now, a year and a half later, she still hasn't fully opened up to us about it. However, I never really liked the guy. He was nice enough, but he couldn't handle his drink at all. He never had just a little drink. He had to drink the whole bar every time. Then he would come home and make a mess all over the house. After that, he had the nerve to complain whenever my sister would go out with her friends for a couple of drinks. He eventually stopped letting her go out altogether. His family was a complete mess too. His mom and stepdad were pretty cool, but they moved to Canada to follow their dreams, leaving my sister and her fiancé in the care of aunts and uncles who didn't approve of her at all. His younger brother was on and off with his teenage girlfriend, who he eventually got pregnant, and she was always trying to outdo my sister. In the end, as far as she's told us, she just felt trapped by this guy. He didn't allow her to hang out with her friends and had her go to family events with people who hated her. He made her distance herself from us, which I think was painful for her because she missed out on quality time with her new nephews at the time. He basically controlled every part of her life. Anyway, she dumped him without ceremony on New Year's Eve and canceled the wedding right then and there. I don't think she even saw him again after that. She was always out when he came to get his things. Obviously, his family wasn't too happy about it and pestered her for months. She became depressed and needed medication, but it was my family that had to pay for the wedding expenses anyway. They were just glad to have their daughter back. Story 7. My boyfriend at the time had a female friend who, the night before her wedding, finally confessed to several friends, including him, that her fiancé had been mistreating her. She wasn't sure if she should go through with the marriage. We'd all noticed her becoming distant from us, but she would always deny that anything was wrong. The next day, her family took action to inform all the wedding guests about the situation. A group of her friends basically had their way into the guy's house to get all her belongings back. My boyfriend was a police officer, so he had a responsibility to take legal action against the guy. Although I was never completely clear on the details of what happened, the woman was angry with my boyfriend for a while because of this. However, a few years later, she's in a much happier relationship with someone I've known for a long time. She now understands that her friends and family are there for her and can help her when she needs it. Story 8. I have shared this story before in a somewhat similar post, but here it is again. I was engaged, so I was almost a bride. There were several final straws that led to the end of the relationship. A few of these happened before the engagement. First, he was living in his car when we started dating, which meant he wasn't financially stable. This happened just a couple of weeks into our relationship. Another issue was him wanting me to send him selfies all the time to prove where I was and what I was wearing. This was almost always my work clothes since I'm a server and wear a black long-sleeved shirt and pants. If I didn't text him back quickly enough, he would think I was with another man. About a month into the relationship, he demanded a key to my condo so he could see me whenever he wanted, not just when it was convenient for me. The biggest final straw came when he proposed. He got down on one knee and said, "I knew we were meant to be the moment we matched on Tinder. I love you so much. Now I can show everyone that I own you. Will you marry me?" I said no immediately and walked away. This happened just 3 months into the relationship. I'd never met his family, although I'd heard a lot about them. He'd only met my mother once, and that wasn't planned. After I said no to his proposal, he tried to get into my condo many times and kept calling me. Unfortunately, I had to change my phone number and get a restraining order against him. He was, and probably still is, crazy. Story 9. This story isn't about me, but about my mother. My mom canceled a wedding just a few weeks before the ceremony because she found out her fiancé had lied to her about where he was. He was actually partying at a hotel with friends and other women. She caught him in the hot tub at 1 a.m. with twin sisters. A few years later, she started dating and eventually married the man who is my biological father. It was especially awkward for her when she met his family and discovered that my father had 3 sisters, 2 of whom were the twins she had caught her ex-fiancé with in the hot tub. To clarify a few things, my mom and dad stayed together and got married after my mom had learned who his sisters were, so she did get over the fact that they were involved in the incident that ruined her first wedding. My mom and dad are divorced now and have been for many years. This has nothing to do with my dad's sisters or his family in general. They simply weren't compatible and argued a lot. It wasn't a big surprise that my dad wasn't the most faithful man either. I inherited my faithfulness in relationships from my mom, thankfully. Ooh, I bet that made Christmas dinners really awkward. Story 10. This story isn't mine, but it's about my best friend. Back in high school, I had a friend named Cheyenne. We were very close and loved planning our dream weddings. Every month when the new bridal magazine came out, we would spend our free period sitting on a bench with a pen, circling and talking excitedly about dresses. Fast forward to her junior year, and she met a guy named Nick. Nick was quite popular at our school, mainly because of his older sisters who were triplets and known as the triplets. She and Nick started dating after a few weeks. It wasn't a good relationship. They were constantly breaking up and getting back together, and it was no secret that he cheated on her every other weekend when she was away at her mom's house. After they graduated, they broke up for a short time, but got back together after 3 to 4 months. Halfway through her sophomore year of college, Cheyenne started acting very differently. She began drinking heavily, which led to an argument between us, and we didn't speak for a year. We reconnected when she found out she was pregnant with Nick's baby, and they were planning to get married. I was thrilled, and soon we were as close as we used to be. I was going to be her maid of honor, and they were going to have a beautiful wedding in the mountains. The day of the wedding, Cheyenne seemed nervous and strange. She insisted she was fine, but I kept an eye on her. 15 minutes before the ceremony was supposed to start, I ran outside quickly to see where Cheyenne was because she had stepped out and no one knew where she had gone. I found a pair of small heels by the road nearby. I left the shoes in case she planned to come back and went to tell the day of coordinator, or DOC. The ceremony was put on hold and we all started looking for Cheyenne. I saw Nick get really angry and heard him mutter, "That woman, I'm gonna get my hands on her." I didn't know what to do. I was worried about Cheyenne, thinking she might have fallen down or something, so we had people looking everywhere. I smelled something fishy and thought she might have run off. considering their past and what I had just heard Nick say. I drove into town, which was only a 10-minute drive, more like a 45-minute to 1-hour walk, and saw Cheyenne in her big white fluffy dress, easy to spot, walking into a bar. I went in to talk to her, asking her what happened, and she confessed that Nick had been mistreating her since high school. Apparently that morning, he threatened to end her and her baby if she didn't behave. I called the police immediately, told the DOC to cancel everything, and drove her to the hospital. After a long, complicated trial and a restraining order, Nick was sent to prison, and Cheyenne moved to Portland to be close enough to her family but far enough away from him. Now she's getting remarried in September 2020, and her baby, now 4 years old and beautiful, is named Harmony. Story 11. I've waited a long time to share this story. Years ago, I was a single mom, working hard but not making much progress. I met a good guy type, an architect with a good sense of humor and all. We dated for about a year and then got engaged. But then something terrible happened. This is where I become the bad guy in many people's eyes. He was in a terrible car accident about 10 months before our wedding. He was also diabetic with poor control, which slowed his healing a lot. He ended up stuck in an electric wheelchair. And because his legs were in casts from hip to ankle, they had to be stretched out straight in front of him all the time. I really tried to support him, but he made it incredibly difficult. He complained about everything the doctors told him, refused physical therapy, took his medication wrong, didn't follow the wound care instructions, and didn't take his insulin properly. He did all the things that make for a terrible patient and an even worse person to be around. Throughout all this, our wedding plans were still going ahead, mostly being handled by his family. He was moved from the hospital to a live-in group home, where his condition only got worse. Wearing pants was hard, so he went without anything in his lower half for months, just covering up with a bedsheet. His moods were unpredictable. One night he missed a question in Final Jeopardy and threw his whiz at me. Even after the doctor said he had to start bending his legs, he refused. Fast forward to my wedding day. The staff at the group home did everything they could to make the backyard look beautiful and special for everyone, and it really was lovely. Our families were there, seated, and the pianist was playing. My dad was by my side, ready to walk me down the aisle, but when he opened the door for us to start walking, there he was, with his legs straight out and hospital socks showing under a blanket. I froze. I told my dad I needed to go back inside the house. Once we were alone, I told my dad I couldn't go through with it, and I was sorry. My dad just smiled and said, "Thank God." He called my kids over, loaded us all into his car, and we drove away. We ended up moving to a different state, closer to my family, and we thrived. The groom went in and out of different facilities and never left a wheelchair. I know he was probably dealing with emotional and mental pain that I can't understand, but I also knew I couldn't raise my kids in that kind of environment. My first commitment was to them. I went on to finish my degree, and my kids are now adults. No one has thrown a whiz at me since. Well, yeah, at least you're whiz-free now. Anyways, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 12. I was almost the runaway bride, and I regret not making that decision. I dated my high school sweetheart for almost 2 years before the jealousy became too much to handle. I broke up with him a month after we graduated from high school, but we ended up at the same college and met again that fall. By October, I found out I was pregnant, and I was moved out of my Catholic home because of it. His parents let me stay with him, but we couldn't live in sin according to their beliefs, so we had to get married. I didn't want to go back to living in my car, so I agreed to the marriage. My parents managed to get back into my life before the wedding. On the day of the ceremony, as the music started playing and I stood up to walk down the aisle, my dad took my hand and said, "You know, you don't have to do this. You could come home with us." I was shocked. Why didn't he mention this an hour, a day, or a week before? I've always hated drama and didn't want to be that person who causes a scene, so I just said I couldn't back out, and I went through with the marriage. My ex-husband was controlling, manipulative, and his behavior became more obvious after I got pregnant. It became even worse when we moved out of his parents' house a year later. I finally ran away when he almost hurt our babies. He instead did it to me because he found something in the carpet that I hadn't vacuumed properly. Yeah, I definitely should have chosen to be the runaway bride. Story 13. I wasn't a bride, but I did run away from a proposal. I was dating a guy who, looking back, was not the best, but at the time, I didn't realize it. I knew he was bipolar, which had been diagnosed, and he came from a very unstable family. I tried to be his support and help him get better, and sometimes things were okay. But other times it was just really difficult to deal with. He started talking about marriage about a year into our relationship. We had already broken up and gotten back together twice because of his tantrums and mood swings about how he felt about us. I just sort of went along with the talk of marriage because I did think I wanted to spend my life with him, but I wasn't ready to get married. I thought he was talking about a far-off future when we were more stable. A month later, he proposed. It wasn't a big event or anything, I just didn't see it coming. We were at his house, as usual. Oh, he lived with his parents. He was playing video games and I was watching TV on my laptop. He had ordered a pizza, and when it arrived, we sat down to eat. Then he took out a ring and proposed. I saw my whole future flash before my eyes. Getting married and being stuck with this person for the rest of my life. I froze. I knew I didn't want to say yes, but I was too scared to say no. He took my silence as a rejection and started yelling at me, calling me ungrateful and asking how I could refuse him. His parents came in and started yelling at me too for rejecting their son. I started crying, grabbed my purse, and ran out of the house. I didn't have my car, so I walked a block and called for an Uber. That poor Uber driver must have been shocked, picking up a girl on the side of the road, crying her eyes out. When I got home, I was shaking. Of course, he tried to call me over and over again, but I refused to talk to him for about 3 weeks. We eventually did talk, and I told him I didn't want to be with someone so unstable. I said he needed professional help and to get better before he could work in a relationship. He never did get help, and I haven't heard from him since. Story 14. We had only been together for 6 months when he proposed. We were both young and not even living together. My instincts told me right away that it was too soon, but I said yes anyway because I thought he loved me and I loved him. I truly believed we could build a good life together. I made it clear that I wanted to wait before he got married, but he was eager to move things along as quickly as possible. I didn't even want to tell our families about the engagement because I knew they would be upset that we were so young and had only been together for a few months. As time went on, I continued to say that I wasn't ready to get married at my age and wanted to spend more time with him before we took that step. He didn't take it well and accused me of cheating on him, thinking there was no other reason I would want to wait. Things became very bad, and I eventually left him for good. I returned the engagement ring and we parted ways civilly, but he wasn't ready to let go easily. He called and texted me constantly for weeks, accusing me of being obsessed with him and following him around. I started to realize he wasn't thinking clearly, and it was scary. Thankfully, it calmed down after a while and things began to return to normal. Unfortunately, he started spreading awful rumors about me, claiming I had accused him of crimes. His whole family turned against me because of these lies, and it was tough since we shared many of the same friends. He damaged my reputation and my self-esteem, but it made me realize I had avoided a disaster by not marrying him. Every now and then he messages me on social media, wanting to get back together. I either don't respond or give him a polite but very firm no. This isn't really important, but it's another interesting detail. He gave my engagement ring to his mother as a Mother's Day gift, and now she wears it all the time. She must know it used to be mine, but she still sees it as a sweet gift from her troubled son. Story 15. When I was in high school, I worked at Chess King in the mall. A man came in who was very taken with me. He had lied about his age at first, saying he was 20, but I soon found out he was actually 26. I had some issues with my dad, loved the attention, and quickly thought I was in love. He asked me to marry him just 2 weeks later. He'd even asked my parents for permission, and they said yes, which still upsets me. Summer was coming up, and he wanted me to move in with him for the summer. I was living in New York at the time, and he lived in Maryland. He had been in New York visiting his parents and staying with them until his new job started as a used car salesman. So, I got into his white pickup truck, and we drove to Maryland for the summer. When we arrived, it was a tiny apartment in an all-black neighborhood. We're both white. He had rented the apartment over the phone and had no idea what the neighborhood was like beforehand. This was before the internet. He took his truck to work every day, leaving me without transportation, so I would just walk around during the day. Everyone would stare at me. No one actually talked to me. I felt extremely out of place, even though I tried my best to be okay with the situation. He wanted to be intimate every day the moment he got home from work and expected me to be waiting for him in the bedroom. I hated it. I would close my eyes until it was over. After 5 days while he was at work, I opened the silverware drawer in the apartment and a big roach crawled across the utensils. I'm not sure why that was the turning point for me, but I just said out loud, I don't care anymore. I packed my suitcase and sat on the couch with it on my lap until he got home from work. The second I saw him, I said, "Take me home." He said a lot of things. Was angry, but I didn't say anything besides that I wanted to go home. Somehow he agreed to drive me back to New York, and we left that night. The whole way home, he talked about how this didn't change anything and that we would still be together. I stayed silent. When we pulled into the driveway, I took off the ring and placed it on the console. I didn't say anything and quickly went into the house, locking the door behind me. He didn't come after me, but kept calling constantly for weeks. I refused to answer. I never saw him again. I'm 41 now and have 4 children. Only as an adult have I been able to see how disturbing and frightening what I went through was. For years, I was embarrassed to tell that story, but Now I realize I was a child and that it's him and my parents who should be embarrassed. Story 16. I wasn't a runaway bride, but I was hired to work at a wedding as a florist many years ago. The bride and groom had agreed to every contract and we were all set to get married. The bride was on tour until 2 weeks before the wedding date. She's in the theater, so I mostly talked through email. The groom would come by to make payments and drop off things for the wedding. He was always pretty relaxed, which isn't something you see often with grooms. But it turned out he was cheating on the bride with their own sister and also with a best man's girlfriend, who was part of their friend group. The bride found out just before her bachelorette party and called off the wedding. I felt terrible that we couldn't refund any payments because we had already placed bulk orders for flowers, but we offered her credit for another event. We ended up becoming friends on Facebook. She's getting married to someone else now and seems much happier. Story 17. This story isn't about me, but about my cousin who was supposed to marry a girl. She fell deeply in love with another guy she met just 2 days before the wedding and left my cousin. It wasn't at the altar, but it was very close to the wedding day. I was young at the time and was supposed to be the flower girl. My brothers were the ushers. We lived about 6 hours away, and I remember being very confused during the ride home and wondering why I didn't get to be a flower girl, while everyone else was completely silent. In a surprising twist of fate, the guy she fell in love with is now a professor at the same university where my brother works. His office is just down the hall from my brother's. He and the bride have been married for almost 20 years now. Meanwhile, my cousin has been married 3 times, has been arrested for DUI so many times that I don't think he can even get a driver's license. And he has gained a lot of weight, up to about 300 pounds. I think the girl made the right choice in choosing the other guy. Story 18. I know someone who had to spend money on flights to a location twice because the bride ran away from the groom. The first time she left right before the rehearsal period was about to start. The second time, she ran away at the altar. You might think the guy would have understood the message after the first time, but it was a situation where a rich but not very attractive man had managed to be with a supermodel. Because he was afraid of losing her, he tried to hat her into commitment by being emotionally manipulative, not through actual coercion. Feeling guilty, she was convinced twice to almost go through with the wedding. From the pictures my friend showed me of the couple, I can honestly say that the groom was reaching far beyond what anyone else would have. I can understand why you didn't want to lose her, but I can't support manipulating someone into pretending to love you. Nor can I agree with him deluding himself into thinking it could work after the first failed wedding. At that point, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. Maybe he didn't realize that there were young singles in his area just waiting to meet him. Story 19. Not me, but my friend's wedding. He was getting married to a stunning girl, a real 10 out of 10. She was beautiful, had an amazing figure, and looked incredible in her wedding dress. We were all happy for him because while he wasn't the best-looking guy, he was very talented. He could garden, craft, design, and build. He even designed a watering system for his home garden. When he finished it, he was proud, but we all just asked, "Couldn't you just use a sprinkler?" He laughed and said, "Yeah, but I made this." The wedding day started normally. We all met up, chatted, and talked to the girl's family, who were odd. They weren't weird in a cultish way, more like they seemed uncomfortable and just wanted to get the wedding over with. The ceremony began with the usual rituals. The flower girls walked down the aisle, the bride followed, and everything was going as planned until right before the vows. That's when our friend suddenly ran out of a nearby door, leaving the bride standing there. Then, unbelievably, the bride, her father, and her mother pulled out weapons and chased after him, trying to catch him, I guess, but he had already gone too far away, and none of their weapons got him. The bride's father ended up in jail, her mother passed away of a heart emergency a year or so later, and the bride has become a small influencer with a new guy in her life. The reason our friend ran was because the bride was extremely emotionally hurtful. She made him keep a chart of his whereabouts, who he was talking to, how much money he had, when he'd be back, and what he was doing. She wouldn't let him sleep in the same room as her and would hurt him awake if she found him sleeping on the couch. In their 3 years together, they only had been intimate twice, and he said she was terrible in bed, just lying there like a dead fish. She also never took any responsibility for her life. Her parents bought her a house, a car, and other things. She crashed the car and she got bored of it, tried to end his cat multiple times, and her puppy mysteriously disappeared one day. She was just crazy. Story 20. I was the groom, and I left just moments after the ceremony ended. My ex-partner was mentally unstable. When we started dating, she was on several psychiatric medications that she didn't tell me about. We moved in together and she stopped taking them suddenly, which made my life very difficult. She was constantly crazy. She would go out without letting me know, ignore my calls, and then come back and yell at me for watching a movie with an attractive actress, calling the actress names. In her eyes, every woman was distasteful, and she wouldn't let me leave the house except for work, but she would show up randomly at my job to check on me, making sure I wasn't cheating. She didn't work, and I had a good office job. Thankfully, my manager felt sorry for me. Why did I stay? I wasn't in a good mental state myself. I had a very bad childhood, so I was used to enduring her behavior. Eventually, I agreed to marry her. We planned the wedding and reception, had the ceremony, and everyone thought we were married. But I had a moment of clarity and refused to sign the marriage certificate until she went to counseling and took her medications again. She refused, so I put the certificate away, thinking that was the end of it. I started going to counseling secretly and got my life together. I moved my money into an account she didn't know about. She kept cheating. I kept going to counseling and moving my assets. And then I just disappeared from her life. 4 years later, I was with a new woman and ready to propose. I had the ring and received an email from my ex. She told me we were actually married and wanted a divorce because she had met someone new and wanted to get married again. I was shocked. What had happened was that she couldn't accept being told no. She took my wallet, found a friend who looked like me, and went to the courthouse to file the marriage certificate a week after I had said no. So legally, we were married, and I hadn't known. I was furious, but also relieved she told me before I proposed to my girlfriend. My girlfriend was very understanding and stayed with me while I dealt with my ex. I talked to lawyers about what I could do, but they said there was no proof, so there was nothing to be done. The good news was that she just wanted the divorce and nothing else. The bad news was that her current fiancé broke up with her, and she dragged her feet in the divorce. Luckily, it was all taken care of. She still tries to contact me occasionally, but I ignore her. Now I'm still married to the woman who stayed with me through everything. We're very happy together and have 2 children. Story 21. I've been engaged 4 or 5 times, but only married once. That's important because it sets the stage for these 2 stories. In 2007, the second guy proposed. We met when I was a freshman in college. After a whirlwind romance that lasted just 2 weeks, we impulsively decided to get married one morning. It seemed spontaneous and romantic, right? But young me wasn't making the best decisions. We made it to the courthouse in my small hometown, only to find it closed for renovations that day. We were disappointed, but I quickly realized it was probably for the best. Why rush into marriage? That night he called me, saying he had taken some pills and was trying to end it all. I talked him down and stayed up all night working things out and doing some soul searching. I realized I wasn't ready for marriage, and he had issues he needed to address. I wasn't mentally mature or experienced enough to handle them properly. When I tried to break up with him later, he threatened to end it all again, and I told him I would help as a friend, but not as a significant other. It's been about 12 years and he's much healthier and happier now. He's stable and doing well for himself, and I'm proud to see him thriving. From 2010 to 2012, the fourth guy proposed. It was a long-distance relationship. He was exceptionally handsome, well-educated, lived and worked abroad, came from an upper-class family, and had me wrapped around his finger. We'd been together for a year and a half, traveling between the US, UK, Denmark, and Germany. I wanted to get married, but he didn't until I was about to leave him. He didn't want a monogamous relationship like I did and suggested we could be one of those modern married couples that still meet with other people. He constantly called me names, used intimacy against me psychologically, didn't want me to work because women in his family didn't, and insisted I give up my US citizenship and drop out of college to move overseas with him. There were many other issues, too. One night before I was due to fly home, an elderly cab driver asked me, "If he will make a real commitment to you, why are you wasting your time here in Newcastle, England, with him instead of finding someone who makes you feel whole?" I tried to make excuses, but he wasn't having it. Later that night, the last straw was when he left me crying in pain in the bathtub from the illness he gave me to go do stuff with his neighbor for business. As I left for the airport the next morning, I looked at him from the cab and thought, this is going to be the last time I ever see him in person. I reflected on the conversation with the cab driver and essentially ghosted him when I got back to the States. I met my now husband 2 months later, and we married in 2015. My ex stalked me from 2012 to 2018. I've only ever told my husband and best friend how bad it got with him, and even though we've been together almost 7 years, I still struggle with it sometimes, especially if my husband gets upset with me, which rarely happens. He's a great guy, sweet, funny, respectful, and patient. Story 22. I was a dancer, mostly doing ballet with some appearances in trade shows and a small role on Broadway, though that didn't last long. Anyway, I met this guy, and even though he was a bit slow, I fell for him. We were all set to get married. His dad was the local sheriff, so he took care of all the arrangements for us. It was the day of the wedding, and I was literally at the altar when I got cold feet, so I took off in my wedding dress. My car broke down, but this guy named Bo was kind enough to stop and pick me up. Everyone called him Bo. Now, remember, my future father-in-law was the sheriff. He didn't take kindly to me running away and was on my tail, eventually learning that I was picked up by Bo. He started chasing Bo. It turned out that Bo and his friend the Snowman were running shady business across state lines, so naturally they got worried about being followed by a cop. The chase crossed several states, with other agencies trying and failing to stop us. Near Bo's home it got really bad, but we narrowly escaped capture throughout the chase the sheriff kept on us. I fell in love with Bo, and things were good for a while, but he started drinking too much and I left him. Not knowing where to turn, I went back to my fiancée. We worked out our problems and set a new date to get married. Again, the sheriff got the town all set up and it was the wedding day. I was in the church when I received a phone call. It was Bo's friend, the Snowman. Bo was in a really bad place and they had a chance to make some big money and get their lives back together. However, he needed my help to get Bo. So I left my wedding again and started on a new adventure. Though this time it wasn't cores we were transporting, it was an elephant. But that's a story for another time. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.